Selena Hart, 45 years old, a community librarian who has spent her entire life teaching children to search for truth. 3 hours after burying my own son, I found myself standing in the center of a truth I never asked for. My phone rang with a quiet tone that cut through my grief. It was my son's teacher, her voice shaking as if someone was standing right beside her. She whispered that there was something dangerous, something she could not say over the phone. She begged me to come to her office at once and told me not to alert anyone. Her final plea turned my blood cold. When I reached the school, the hallway felt colder than the cemetery soil still clinging to my shoes. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. Each step echoed like a question I was terrified to answer. I pushed forward until the door of the teacher's office cracked open. In that thin sliver of light, in that silent breath between dread and recognition, I began to tremble. The person standing in front of the doorway was my husband, Elias. His presence there, only hours after our son's burial, shattered the last piece of stability inside me. At that moment, I understood that grief was not the only thing following me. Something else had been waiting in the dark, and it had finally stepped forward. If this beginning resonates with you, take a quiet moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps stories like mine continue to find those who need them most. When I left the school that night, the cold hallway still clinging to my breath, I felt as if I were walking through fog. Grief has a strange way of making the world look blurry and sharp at the same time. By the time I reached home, the sky had darkened into a deep violet. The last light of the day slipped across the porch as I pushed open the front door. The scent of damp soil rose from my clothes, and the sweetness of funeral lilies clung to my hair. It felt as if the cemetery had followed me inside. The house was silent in a way it had never been before. It was the quiet of something unfinished, the quiet that arrives right after love has nowhere left to go. I stepped into the living room and froze when I saw it. My son's beige scarf, soft and frayed at the edges, still lay on the arm of the couch. He had left it there the week before he died. A part of me had hoped someone had moved it during the chaos of the funeral preparations because its presence felt like a hand reaching from a memory I was not ready to hold. The scarf pulled my breath from my chest. I walked toward it as if approaching something sacred. My fingers brushed the fabric. It was cold. Behind me, I heard Elias speaking softly to his relatives in the kitchen. His voice carried that gentle authority he liked to use when portraying himself as the responsible one. I heard my sister-in-law whisper to another relative that he had arranged everything for the funeral, that he had taken care of each detail so I would not have to lift a finger. They praised him with warm voices, calling him strong and dependable. I stood in the living room listening, letting their words fall over me like dust. They did not see the distance in his eyes all week, the way he seemed more focused on logistics than on loss. They did not see how his grief looked too practiced, too measured, as if he were performing a role he had played before. He walked into the living room soon after, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. His expression was soft, full of concern. To an outsider, he would have looked like a man carrying both his own pain and mine. He squeezed my arm with a steady, comforting rhythm. I nodded as if I believed in the version of him everyone else admired. But inside, I felt a thin crack widening, one I could no longer ignore after what happened at the school. While relatives moved around the house, picking up dishes and murmuring condolences, I drifted back in time. I remembered the years when I worked 2 jobs so Elias could finish his master's degree. I remembered waking before sunrise to prepare breakfasts, sending Liam to daycare with a hurried kiss, then running across town to my first shift. I remembered sitting in our small apartment late at night, sorting bills under the dim kitchen lamp, telling myself that sacrifices were temporary and that love was the long-term investment. Elias would come home from night classes smelling of coffee and chalk dust, dropping his textbooks on the table and thanking me for holding everything together. I believed him then. I believed that our shared struggle would bind us, that success would eventually lift us both. But the truth was that only one of us rose. The other learned to disappear. I sat on the couch and pulled the beige scarf into my lap. Its weight felt wrong without Liam's warmth inside it. While I traced the threads with my thumb, I sensed someone standing in the doorway. When I looked up, Jonas Reed was there. He had arrived quietly, as he always did. His hands were folded loosely in front of him, and his eyes carried the kind of understanding that makes a person feel seen without being exposed. Jonas had been my friend long before I met Elias. Life has scattered us in different directions, but grief has a strange way of pulling old connections back into orbit. He stepped into the room and lowered himself onto the opposite end of the couch. He did not offer empty words or try to fix anything. He simply said my name with a gentleness that almost undid me. I thanked him for coming, though my voice hardly rose above a whisper. Jonas nodded, studying my face with quiet respect. It felt grounding to sit near someone who did not treat me like a fragile thing that needed constant managing. If grief had a language, Jonas spoke it fluently. From the kitchen, voices lowered again. My sister-in-law's tone softened as she walked closer. She paused in the doorway, hesitating before delivering a sentence that would sit in my bones long after she left. She said that I should stop digging into things, that Liam's passing was fate. She suggested the universe had made its decision, and that searching for answers would only prolong my suffering. Her words settled on the room like ash. Jonas lifted his eyes, studying her with a calm intensity. I felt my heart tighten. There is a kind of silence that carries outrage without raising its voice. That silence lived between us. She left before I could respond. I looked down at the scarf again, holding it as if I could anchor myself to something that still felt real. The house grew quiet once more. Jonas touched the edge of the scarf, just lightly, as if asking permission to share the space of my grief. I nodded. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single pulse, soft but sharp enough to pull me back into the present. When I saw the name on the screen, my breath stilled. The unanswered truth was calling again. The name glowing on my phone made my pulse thicken. It was Callie Voss. She had been Liam's homeroom teacher, gentle and observant, the kind of teacher who noticed when a child carried too much on their small shoulders. I stepped away from the couch and lifted the phone to my ear. My voice cracked as I answered. The moment Callie spoke, I knew something was terribly wrong. Her words came out in a rushed whisper, so faint I had to press a finger to my other ear to hear her. She sounded as if she were hiding inside a closet or behind a door she was afraid might swing open. She asked if I could come back to the school immediately. Then she begged me not to tell Elias. Her voice broke when she said that. Not to tell my own husband. It was not the request that chilled me. It was the terror underneath it. I asked her what she meant, but she begged me again to come quickly. She said she had something that belonged to Liam, something she should have given me earlier but had been too frightened to share. The line crackled before going silent. I stood there holding the phone, feeling the scarf in my other hand. Jonas was still sitting on the couch, watching me with quiet worry. I did not know how to explain what I had just heard. Before he could ask, I told him I needed to go back to the school. His posture straightened with instinctive concern. He offered to drive me, but I told him no. Grief had already taken so much from me. I needed to walk toward the truth on my own legs. He hesitated, wanting to protest, but he respected the kind of fear that belongs only to a mother. He stepped aside. The house was still buzzing with murmured condolences from relatives, but I did not acknowledge any of them. I slipped out the front door and into the night air. The sky had begun to drizzle, the kind of misty rain that feels like a veil rather than a storm. I walked to my car, my hands trembling as I opened the door. As I sat behind the wheel, I remembered the final weeks before Liam died. He had complained of stomach pains several times, small aches that would tighten his little face. Each time I grew worried, Elias would place a hand on my shoulder and tell me that our son was going through a normal phase of growth. He said boys his age often had these discomforts. He always spoke with such authority that I allowed myself to believe him. Tonight, that trust felt like a bruise blooming beneath my ribs. I started the engine. The wipers brushed away the mist with a slow rhythm. As I pulled out of the driveway, the rain thickened slightly. The world outside the windshield blurred into streaks of gray and pale gold from the streetlights. My thoughts swirled in tight circles. There are moments when grief and suspicion collide, and a person realizes that even sorrow can have shadows. My heart pounded as I followed the familiar road toward the school. The rain tapped lightly against the glass. I found myself whispering a line I had once said to Liam during a storm. There are certain rains that make people see more clearly than sunlight ever could. Tonight felt like one of those rains. Each drop sharpened my senses. It reminded me that truth often hides in the quiet. In the corners people assume no one will look. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, though my breath caught every few minutes. Halfway to the school, my phone rang again. The sound startled me, cutting through the soft rhythm of the rain. When I glanced at the screen, I saw Jonas's name. I knew he was calling to make sure I was safe. I let the phone vibrate in the console without answering. Silence can be a shield. It can be a choice a person makes when they are not ready to share the weight they carry. Tonight, I needed my fear and my determination to sit beside me without interruption. The phone rang a second time, then stopped. I kept driving. As I approached the school, the rain eased into a gentle drizzle. The parking lot looked nearly deserted, with only a few scattered cars reflecting the dim exterior lights. I pulled into a spot near the entrance, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment. The building seemed larger at night, as if the darkness widened its walls. I took a breath, tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and told myself that whatever truth waited inside, I would face it. I stepped out of the car, letting the mist settle on my coat. The walkway glistened beneath my feet. As I approached the main entrance, the weight of the silence pressed against my chest. I reached for the door, hesitating for a fraction of a second before pushing it open. The familiar scent of floor polish and old books drifted toward me. The fluorescent lights flickered with a faint hum, and the hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel carved from shadow. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of my footsteps. Each echo traveled down the corridor before returning to me in a quiet wave. I knew Callie was somewhere inside, waiting with something that could change everything I understood about my son's final days. I placed my hand on the next door. Then, with a breath that steadied my shaking nerves, I pushed it open and stepped into the dark hallway of the school. The hallway stretched before me like a long-held breath. I walked slowly, listening to the faint hum of the lights above me. I could see the door to the teachers' offices at the far end, a thin rectangle of shadow framed by faint fluorescent glow. My steps softened as I approached, my heartbeat tightening in my throat. I lifted my hand to reach for the door, but before my fingers touched it, the latch clicked. The door opened only a sliver at first, just wide enough for a shape to appear. Then the shape stepped forward, blocking the doorway entirely. It was Elias, my husband, the man who only hours ago stood beside me at our son's burial. He looked different under the school's harsh lighting. His face was calm, composed, almost too controlled. His eyes were dark in a way I had never fully noticed before. But his mouth curved into that familiar, polite smile he used whenever he wanted people to believe he had everything under control. The smile that never quite reached his eyes. He stood there as if he belonged in that space, as if my presence was the unexpected intrusion. He tilted his head slightly, lowering his voice to a tone that sounded gentle to anyone who did not know him as well as I once believed I did. He asked why I had come. The question sliced through the space between us with a softness that felt crueler than shouting. His tone held no grief, no tremor of a man who had lost a child. There was only calculation under the quiet. Behind him, through the narrow opening of the door, I saw Callie. She stood near her desk with her hands clasped tightly together. Her shoulders were shaking. She looked at me the way a person looks at a life raft they are too scared to reach for. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to speak, but fear sealed the words in her throat. I had never seen her like that. The realization chilled me. Someone had frightened her, and I could tell exactly who. I tried to step forward, but Elias shifted just enough to block me. His smile tightened. He repeated the question, slower this time. Why was I here? I felt my palms grow warm despite the cold air in the building. I did not answer. I looked into his eyes and realized they held nothing of the man who used to hold our son during thunderstorms. They were hollow in a way that frightened me. Callie's breathing hitched behind him, barely audible, but I heard it. My eyes flicked toward her, and in that brief second something passed between us. A plea, a warning, a promise that she was trying to get a message to me. Elias turned partially toward her and spoke in a tone of subtle command. He told her to explain why he was there. His politeness did not mask the threat beneath it. Callie nodded quickly, her voice trembling as she said he had come to collect Liam's remaining items. She said it exactly the way he wanted her to say it, the way one speaks when rehearsing a line under duress. Elias nodded as if satisfied, his smile widening. I felt my heart tighten in my chest. There was something profoundly wrong in that room, something neither of them wanted to say aloud, though for different reasons. Elias shifted his stance, allowing the door to open slightly wider as though offering me a view of the room, but not enough space to enter. I took one quiet step forward. Callie's hand moved quickly, almost imperceptibly toward the edge of the door. As she passed me, pretending to brush by, her fingers pressed something small and folded into my palm, a piece of paper. Her touch was brief but urgent. I kept my hand closed around the paper, not daring to look at it. I knew Elias was watching for any sign of suspicion. I kept my face still, my breath steady. Silence can be its own shield. I had learned long ago that raising my voice around Elias only made him sharpen his own. I never won arguments with words. Tonight, I chose stillness. Elias spoke again, asking if I needed anything else. His voice was gentle, like a doctor comforting a patient moments before delivering a diagnosis they would not survive. I told him I was fine. My tone revealed nothing. His smile tightened by a fraction. He closed the door slowly, deliberately, leaving me alone in the hallway. I walked back to my car with careful steps, not letting the panic rise until I was safely inside with the door locked. Only then did I unfold the paper. It was small, torn from a notebook, and creased with hurried fingers. The handwriting was shaky but clear. It held only 2 lines. Do not trust anyone. Liam left you something you need. The paper shook in my hands. The truth had cracked open, and there was no going back. I sat in the car with the note trembling between my fingers. The words were simple, but they pulsed with danger. Do not trust anyone. Liam left you something you need. My breath felt thin in my chest. The rain had eased into a soft mist, wrapping the car in a quiet shell. For a long moment, I could not move. The silence inside me had weight. It pressed down until I could no longer stay still. I drove home on instinct, barely aware of the road. Each turn felt automatic, as if my body remembered the way even when my mind could not focus. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house lights glowed through the windows. The sight tightened something inside me. This house had always felt like a place of safety, but now it felt like a place filled with shadows. I slipped through the door and moved carefully down the hallway. Voices from the living room drifted softly, relatives still lingering, unaware that the ground beneath my life had shifted. I kept my head down and made my way to Liam's room. The door creaked faintly as I pushed it open, and a rush of air met me. It carried the scent of his shampoo, a mix of coconut and something sweet. It hit me so suddenly that my knees almost weakened. The room looked exactly as he had left it. His quilted blanket, patterned with little foxes, lay neatly folded at the foot of the bed. His school books were stacked on the desk, pencil marks still smudged across the edges. The beige scarf that had always belonged to him sat draped over his reading chair. I picked it up carefully and held it for a moment, pressing the fabric between my fingers. The texture was soft and worn, the way fabric gets after years of being held by small hands. I set it across my lap as if placing a child there again. My eyes drifted around the room slowly, taking in every detail. His storytelling trophy, the little bronze cup he won during the 3rd grade fair, gleamed faintly under the light. Next to it sat his old audio player, the one he had begged me not to throw away even though it no longer worked properly. I touched the edge of the device, tracing the scratches along its sides. Each mark felt like a memory. I knelt beside his bed and reached for the stuffed animal he loved most, a small gray wolf with frayed ears. When I lifted it, it felt slightly heavier than usual. Something inside it shifted. A faint click sounded as I pressed gently around its belly. My heart stalled. Carefully, I opened the seam he had once asked me to mend. Inside, tucked neatly into the padding, was a tiny recorder, the kind children use when they pretend to be spies or explorers. Liam had carried this around for months. My hands shook as I pulled it free. I stared at the small device, unsure if I was ready to hear whatever it held. But the note in my pocket burned with urgency. I pressed the play button. Static crackled at first. Then Liam's voice filled the room, weak and thin. "Mom, I feel tired after taking the medicine Dad gave me." His words were soft, as if he had whispered them while lying down. The device clicked again before going silent. I felt something hollow open inside me. It was not the kind of grief that made me cry. It was deeper, heavier, the kind that made the world tilt. I sat back on the floor, the recorder resting in my palm. My breath came in shallow waves. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. I wanted to believe that Elias would never give our son anything harmful, that there was some misunderstanding. But the pieces were beginning to form a pattern I could not ignore. My mind raced through the last few weeks. Liam complained of stomach pain. Elias insisted it was normal. Elias gives him medicine at night. Elias told me not to worry. The memory of Elias's calm face at the school flashed through my mind. That polite smile, those empty eyes. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the tremor beneath my ribs. I was not ready for this truth, but truth has a way of finding its way into a quiet room, even when the door is closed. I wrapped the recorder inside Liam's beige scarf, hiding it within the folds. The fabric felt protective, like it was keeping him safe even now. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, and placed the scarf back onto the chair. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Familiar. Elias. My heart lurched. Without thinking, I tucked the recorder deeper into the scarf and stepped away from the chair. The doorknob turned slightly. I held my breath as the shadow of his feet paused outside the room. The shadow beneath the door remained still for a breath, then shifted. The knob rattled once, twice, and then Elias's voice broke through the quiet. He called my name gently at first, as if he were checking whether I had fallen asleep. When I did not answer, the gentleness vanished. His tone sharpened. He asked why the door was locked. I stood frozen in the center of Liam's room, the recorder hidden inside the beige scarf behind me. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The door shook again as he pushed harder, the wood vibrating against the hinges. I backed away slowly, my feet moving over the soft carpet with barely a sound. I could feel the walls closing in. Elias struck the door with the side of his fist, the blow loud enough to make the picture frames on the wall tremble. He demanded I open the door. His voice carried no grief, no confusion, only irritation, as if my silence inconvenienced him. I turned my head toward the mirror hanging beside the dresser. For a moment I saw myself clearly. A woman whose face no longer held tears, a woman who looked exhausted beyond sadness, a person worn down by years of giving more than she received. I barely recognized her. Elias pounded the door again. I swallowed and stepped backward until my shoulder pressed against the window frame. The cool glass steadied me. I knew I could not stay in the room, not with the evidence tucked behind me, not with the way his voice cut through the silence. I reached slowly for the latch and slid it open without a sound. The air outside drifted in, cool and sharp, smelling faintly of pine. The tree outside Liam's window stood tall and familiar. It was the maple he had climbed every summer, the one he had pretended was a pirate mast or a lookout tower. I used to scold him for shimmying up the trunk, worried he would fall. But he always laughed, promising he knew exactly where to place his hands. I remembered standing in the yard watching him once, marveling at how fearless he was. Now I needed that fearlessness. I pushed the window upward, just enough to slip through. Elias hit the door again, harder than before. The sound jolted my spine. I lifted one leg over the frame, then the other, my fingers gripping the sill. The drop was only a few feet, cushioned by old leaves and soft soil. I took one breath, steadying myself, and lowered my body toward the tree. My foot caught the first thick branch easily. Liam had been right. The climb was not as difficult as it looked. Behind me, Elias's voice rose with impatience. He called my name again, telling me to stop playing. Games. I eased down the trunk carefully, my fingers wrapping around the same knobs of bark I had once warned Liam were dangerous. When my feet touched the ground, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time since he had appeared at the school, I felt distant. Not safe yet, but distance. I ran across the yard, keeping low, letting the darkness fold over me. The grass was damp beneath my shoes. I reached the side gate and slipped through it, pulling it closed as quietly as I could. The street beyond the fence was dim, illuminated only by a few weak streetlights. The night felt wide and uncertain. I wrapped my arms around myself and hurried toward the sidewalk. When I reached the shadowed curve of the road, far from the glow of the house, I stopped. My breath came in short bursts. I reached into the scarf and pulled out the recorder. My thumb hesitated above the play button. Part of me feared hearing the voice again, fearing confirming the truth I already sensed. But I pressed it anyway. Liam's whisper returned. "Mom, I feel tired after taking the medicine Dad gave me." The words broke into the night, soft but undeniable. The sound dug into my chest, not with violence, but with devastating clarity. It was real. It was recorded. It was my son's voice, captured in fear. My knees weakened. I leaned forward slightly, clutching the device in my hand. The truth had a weight I was not prepared for, yet I could no longer avoid it. The air around me felt colder, sharper. Each inhale hurt, but I forced myself to breathe. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, I needed help. Someone who would not question my sanity or dismiss my fear. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to Jonas's name, the familiar comfort of it grounding me. I pressed the call button. When he answered, his voice was steady, warm, exactly what I needed. I whispered the only words I could manage. "I need help." Jonas arrived within minutes, his old truck pulling up beside the curb where I stood trembling in the dark. The passenger door creaked as he leaned over and pushed it open for me. His face, lit by the dashboard glow, carried quiet alarm but no judgment. That steadiness was something I had always trusted. I climbed in, clutching the recorder hidden beneath Liam's beige scarf. Jonas waited until I had fastened the seatbelt before he pulled away from the house. He did not ask questions right away. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, giving me space to breathe. The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It felt like a blanket, soft and steadying after a night filled with sharp edges. He drove toward the outskirts of town, where the streets thinned and the noise faded into wide patches of darkness. I recognized the route. He was taking me to his old sound studio, a place he had rebuilt after his own life had collapsed years ago. He once told me the studio had saved him. In a room insulated from the world, he had learned how to listen. Again, not just to music, but to himself. When we arrived, he unlocked the side door and led me inside. The familiar scent of wood, dust, and old speakers wrapped around us. Rows of equipment lined the walls, some new, some relics of the past. There were blankets draped over recording booths, stacks of tape reels, and a single lamp casting a warm amber glow across the room. I felt my shoulders loosen slightly. This space had always felt honest. Jonas motioned for me to sit. I lowered myself onto a worn leather chair while he pulled up another one across from me. Only then did he speak. His voice was gentle but firm. He asked me to show him what I had found. I hesitated before unwrapping the scarf and handing him the recorder. His fingers brushed the device carefully, as if aware of the weight it carried. He pressed play. Liam's faint whisper filled the room. "Mom, I feel tired after taking the medicine Dad gave me." Jonas sat back slowly. His jaw tightened, but his eyes remained calm. He listened twice, studying every crackle, every breath. When the recording clicked off, he set the device on the table between us. He told me that the audio was powerful, heartbreaking, and deeply suspicious. But he also warned me that in a courtroom or investigation, it might not be enough. Recordings can be dismissed as manipulated. People can claim they were altered or staged. Without context, without something tying Elias directly to intent or action, this single recording could be attacked from every angle. His words settled in my chest like cold stones. I felt myself sinking. Doubt, not in my son, but in my ability to uncover the truth, began to coil inside me. So I told Jonas everything. I told him how Elias had lived off my income during the first years of our marriage, how I had worked 2 jobs so he could finish his degree, how he had gradually shifted from grateful to entitled. I told him about the little ways he had reshaped our home, our conversations, even my confidence. I said it quietly, as if speaking too loudly would make the memories reappear physically in the room. When I finished, Jonas leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes carried something warm and deeply respectful. He said my name softly. "Selena, you have lived far too kindly, but kindness is not the same as weakness. You survived things that would have broken others. You held your family together while someone else pretended to carry the weight. Do not mistake gentleness for fragility." The words struck something inside me. Not a wound, but a truth I had ignored for too long. Jonas tapped the recorder lightly with his fingertips. He told me the device was a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. If we wanted answers to emerge unmistakably, we could not chase Elias directly. We had to let him reveal himself. People like him, Jonas said, always talk when they believe no one is listening. They confess through arrogance, through carelessness, through the belief that they are untouchable. I stared at the device, imagining Liam's small hands hiding it inside the stuffed wolf. My chest tightened. My son had tried to tell me something, and now Jonas was offering a way to hear the rest of the story. He asked me if I truly wanted the truth, not the comforting version, not the manageable one, but the real one, the one that might change everything about the man I thought I married. I nodded. My voice would not come out, but my resolve was clear. Jonas leaned back, exhaled, and gave me a steady look. "If we want the truth to break open," he said, "we have to let them speak it themselves." And at that moment, the plan began. Jonas worked quickly the next morning. By noon, he had created a temporary janitorial badge with my name printed in small block letters. The laminate was worn, the edges deliberately scuffed, and the magnetic strip encoded just enough to get me through the service entrance of the building where Elias worked. When he handed it to me, I felt a mixture of dread and purpose settle into my chest. He reminded me that time mattered. "People in grief behave in predictable cycles," he said, "but people hiding something behave in patterns that tighten under pressure. If Elias felt the walls closing in, he would make mistakes. Our job was to witness those mistakes." I arrived at the company long after most employees had gone home. The sun had already dipped low, coloring the windows a deep amber. I wore plain clothes, gloves, and a cap pulled low over my eyes. My reflection in the glass doors looked nothing like the woman I had been a week ago. I pressed the badge to the sensor. A faint click responded. The door opened. Inside, the building felt colder than it should have. The hallways were lined with framed awards and motivational posters Elias had always admired. His pride in this place had grown in recent years, sometimes overshadowing the pride he should have felt for his own family. I walked quietly toward his office on the 5th floor, my footsteps absorbed by the carpet. When I pushed open the door to his workspace, the air smelled faintly of cologne and old paper. The lamp on his desk cast a single cone of light across piles of folders. My pulse settled into a slow, steady rhythm. Jonas had insisted I take my time. Rushing, he warned, made people miss what mattered. I started with the top drawer: receipts, envelopes, meeting notes, nothing significant. The second drawer held financial documents, some routine, some oddly classified. I opened a thick folder labeled with Liam's name. Inside were legal forms indicating asset transfers, small accounts in Liam's name, beneficiary designations rewritten. Each form shifted ownership to Elias. My fingertips tingled as I read. These documents had been signed within the last 6 months. Months when Liam had been alive and confused about the medicine he was given. Months when I had been too tired to question anything. I set the documents down and steadied myself before moving to the computer. Jonas had taught me how to use a portable drive to collect emails without leaving a trace. I connected the device and navigated through Elias's inbox. My breath tightened when I found a thread between him and Principal Rowan Hale. The subject lines were vague, but the content was not. They referenced timing, discretion, and the need to finalize arrangements before disruptions arise. One message said that sentimentality cannot interfere with outcomes. Another mentioned that Liam would not have recognized the significance anyway. My throat felt scraped raw as I recorded each window with my phone, capturing every word, every cold line, every implication. I had almost finished when I heard footsteps in the hallway. 2 sets, light, quick steps paired with the confident rhythm of heels. Panic rose sharply in my chest. I unplugged the drive and ducked behind a tall filing cabinet near the corner of the room. The door swung open. Elias entered first, his posture relaxed, his tone almost cheerful. Renee Boyd followed him. She was his new assistant, sharp-featured, polished, a woman who carried ambition like perfume. She closed the door behind them and laughed at something Elias had said. Their conversation seeped into the air like poison. Elias spoke about how everything was falling into place. Renee replied that the timing could not be better. They discussed meetings with Rowan Hale, financial projections, the relief of having loose ends finally tied. Every word deepened the ache in my ribs. They stood only a few feet from where I hid. I could see their shadows stretching across the floor, their movements slow and easy. People who believed they were safe. People who believed no one was listening. Renee asked if he ever feared anything might resurface. Elias chuckled quietly, the sound colder than any silence I'd ever heard. He said that grief softened people, made them compliant, made questions disappear. He said everything had happened just as planned. My breath stopped. Not metaphorically, truly. For a moment, I forgot how to draw air. I pressed my back deeper against the cabinet, clutching the beige scarf I had stuffed into my pocket for courage. My fingers tightened around it, the fabric soft and warm from my touch. It felt like Liam's small hands were with me, steadying me, reminding me why I had come. Eventually, Elias and Renee left the office, locking the door behind them. I waited until their footsteps faded before standing. My legs trembled, but I stayed upright. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a presence, cold, clear, breathing down my neck. I stepped out from behind the cabinet, scarf still in my hand, feeling its familiar weight as I whispered to myself that this was only the beginning. Jonas drove us to the riverbank just after sunset, the sky fading into a muted blue that matched the ache inside my chest. The river moved slowly, its surface carrying thin streaks of reflected streetlights. The world felt quieter here, as if it understood I needed space to breathe. Jonas spread an old blanket on the ground and sat beside me. I held the recorder in my hands, the metal cool against my palms. He asked if I was ready to listen again. I nodded, though my stomach tightened. I pressed play. The faint hum of Elias's office, the clipped tones of his emails, the chilling conversation with Renee, and the fragile whisper of Liam all flowed together like pieces of a broken puzzle. Each sound was sharp in the still night air. When the recording ended, the silence afterward felt heavier than the river itself. Jonas leaned back on his hands, eyes fixed on the slow current. He asked the question gently, without pressure. Did I want to bring Elias to justice immediately? The words struck me with their clarity. Justice. It had always sounded like something bright, something clean, but tonight it felt tangled and dark. I looked out over the water. The river moved with steady purpose, unhurried, carrying leaves and small branches with quiet finality. I wished my heart could move like that, unburdened by doubt. I told Jonas I was not ready to drag everything into the open. Not yet. The truth felt too raw, too explosive. And there was another fear, deeper and more complicated. I told him people loved simple stories. They liked villains who were obvious and mothers who were hysterical. If I exposed Elias now, if I walked into a station with these recordings, the world might see me as a grieving woman desperate to blame someone. A wife lashing out after losing her son, a mother refusing to accept fate. I said it quietly, but the words carried weight. People would whisper that I was accusing my husband out of rage, out of denial, out of the pain of losing a child. They would say grief made me unstable. They would say I was trying to tarnish the memory of a father who had just buried his son. My throat tightened as I spoke. The injustice of it settled deep inside me. I wanted the truth to stand on its own legs, not twisted, not dismissed, not reduced to a story people told to comfort themselves. Jonas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took a long breath and sat upright, turning toward me fully. His gaze was steady, grounding. Then he said something that sank into my bones. Truth does not need noise. It only needs someone brave enough to stand still. The words echoed inside me, resonating with the quiet strength I had forgotten I possessed. Standing still did not mean doing nothing. It meant allowing space for truth to reveal itself in its own time, without being forced into a shape others could distort. It meant trusting that clarity could grow in silence, even when the world demanded spectacle. I looked down at the recorder. The device felt like both a gift and a burden. Liam had left me something he must have hoped I would find. I imagined his small hands hiding the recorder inside the stuffed wolf, his brave attempt to speak when his voice was too weak. My heart pulled tight. Jonas placed his hand over the back of mine, a gesture of quiet solidarity. He reminded me that I did not owe the world a performance. I owed myself the truth, and I owed Liam the courage to follow it. We sat there for a long while, the river whispering beside us. The first stars appeared, faint pinpricks against the darkening sky. The night felt like a threshold, a place where I could no longer turn back, but was not yet ready to move forward. My grief pressed against my ribs, but something else rose beneath it. Resolve. Not loud or dramatic, just steady. I told Jonas I wanted to understand the full story before exposing anything. I needed the truth to be undeniable, not open to interpretation or dismissal. I needed Elias to reveal himself in his own words, in his own choices. That was the only way to ensure no one could twist the narrative into one where I was the villain or the hysterical widow. Jonas nodded, his expression thoughtful. He picked up a small stone and tossed it gently toward the water. The ripples spread outward in widening circles, each ring touching another. He said that sometimes the best way to uncover a lie was not to attack it head-on, but to give it enough freedom to expose its own shape. I felt something settle inside me, clear and unshakable. I would not seek revenge. I would not scream or accuse. I would let truth rise naturally, the way river water rises after rain. I would create space for Elias to show who he really was. I closed my fingers around the recorder and looked at Jonas. My voice was calm, steady. Then we set the trap, not to hurt him, not to punish him, but to close a chapter that should never have been written in the dark. Night settled over the house like a slow exhale. The quiet felt almost unnatural, stretched thin in a way that made every sound sharper. I sat at the edge of my bed, holding Liam's picture frame in my lap. His smile in the photo felt like warm sunlight pressed between glass. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb, grounding myself in the memory of who I was before truth began unraveling everything I thought I knew. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Elias. The name glowed on the screen, steady and insistent. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice poured through the speaker, warm, soft, threaded with just enough tenderness to sound believable to anyone who did not know the man behind the tone. He told me he missed me. He told me he hated the distance between us. He said grief made people say things they did not mean, that the only way forward was to lean on each other instead of pulling apart. He framed every sentence with the elegance of a man who understood emotional manipulation better than honesty. The words were sweet, but their sweetness tasted like something spoiled. Underneath it was the push, the familiar tightening, the desire to bring me back under his control. He asked where I had gone earlier. He asked why the bedroom door had been locked the night before. He asked if I was hiding something from him. His tone remained gentle, but each question narrowed the space around me. I recognized it instantly. This was how he shaped silence into obedience. This was how he kept conflict contained until he could tilt it in his favor. I lifted the phone to my ear and answered with only 2 words, "I am fine." The pause that followed cracked like ice. He tried to speak again with that same gentle tone, but it wavered. My calmness unsettled him. My refusal to explain myself, to fill the silence with excuses or fear, irritated him in a way he could not hide. He asked again what was wrong. I repeated the same answer. "I am fine." The silence between us thickened. He exhaled, sharp and controlled. Then he forced a laugh, the sound brittle. He said he wanted to come home early, to talk in person. I told him there was nothing to talk about and ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, I stared at the darkened phone screen, listening to the rapid beat of my own heart. Then I placed the phone down gently and exhaled. Not in fear, in clarity. In the living room, Jonas was hunched over his laptop, cables spread around him like a nest of silver threads. He'd arrived earlier with a quiet determination, saying that if Elias wanted to control the story, then we needed a way to witness the story as it wrote itself. He told me he could tap into the house security system, the one Elias had installed years ago under the guise of protecting the family. Jonas said systems built for surveillance could be turned back on the person who created them. I watched him type, line after line of code filling the screen. Within minutes, he captured access to the audio feed. The house's network opened to him like a locked door, slipping under careful fingers. He adjusted the headphones, his expression sharpening. Then he motioned for me to sit beside him. We listened. It began with Elias calling Rowan Hale. His tone was tight, stripped of performative grief. Rowan sounded rattled from the start. He said someone might have seen something at the school. He said everything needed to stay buried, that Liam's situation could not be mentioned by anyone. He used the word situation like it was an inconvenience, not a child, not my child. Elias told him to stay calm. He reminded Rowan that they had handled everything already, that the timing had been right, and that as long as no one panicked, no one would connect the pieces. He said sentimentality had no place now. My stomach twisted. I pressed a hand over my mouth to steady my breath. Rowan asked if I suspected anything. Elias's answer was smooth. He said I was fragile, overwhelmed, and easily guided. He said grief made me quiet. He said I would not cause trouble because I never had before. Jonas froze, waiting for my reaction. I did not shake. I did not cry. I simply listened. The truth was not whispering anymore. It was speaking plainly. When the call ended, Jonas removed the headphones and handed them to me. The room felt still, heavy, but my hands no longer trembled. I held Liam's picture frame again, gripping it with a steadiness I had not felt since he died. For the first time, the fear inside me did not expand. It narrowed, focused. I understood what needed to happen next, and for the first time, I did not feel alone. Jonas and I stayed up most of the night, the living room lit only by a single lamp and the soft glow of his laptop screen. The house was silent around us, but the air felt charged, as if every wall had begun listening too. On the table between us were printed emails, copied files, and my notes scribbled in uneven handwriting. We began laying everything out in chronological order, not to dramatize it, not to create a story, simply to understand the truth as it had unfolded around us while I had been too tired or too trusting to see it. We marked the dates when Liam first complained of stomach pains. We placed alongside them the emails Elias sent to Rowan Hale about ensuring timing stays aligned. We added the receipts for the medications Elias picked up without telling me, along with the unexplained visits he made to the school during hours when parents were not typically invited. With each connection, the picture became clearer, not a single moment of clarity, but a growing accumulation, a thread tightening around something dark. Jonas leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He pointed to the timeline and said it plainly. Elias did not simply respond to events. He shaped them, guided them. I planned them. The more we studied, the more undeniable it became. My chest constricted, but I forced myself to breathe. Facing the truth was painful, but avoiding it had been worse. At one point, I grew very still, staring at a date circled in red pen. It was the week I had been working double shifts at the library, the week Elias said he would take over bedtime routines so I could get rest. I remembered thanking him then, relieved that he was stepping in. I remembered telling friends that grief had pulled him closer to our son, that he was becoming more nurturing. I pressed my hand hard against my sternum, trying to quiet the ache rising there. I asked Jonas a question I had been afraid to voice before. I asked him if he blamed me for not seeing it sooner. My voice was low, barely stronger than a breath. His reaction was immediate. He set down the papers, turned toward me, and shook his head with a firmness that cut through the room. He said a mother who loves her child always looks with her heart first, and no one in this world should ever fault a heart that is pure. The words sank into me slow and deep, easing a guilt I carried like a stone. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but they did not fall. Something inside me was healing, in small increments, not all at once, but enough to let me breathe again. When the timeline was complete, I realized the truth was no longer a collection of clues. It was a structure, solid, coherent, and deeply damning. Jonas suggested the next step. He said having the truth was not enough. It needed to be placed in the hands of someone who could act on it, quietly and ethically. Someone who would not dismiss me as a grieving wife or twist my intentions. I thought for a long moment before remembering someone who fit that description. Elias's former attorney, a meticulous, honorable man who had once treated me with genuine respect. Far more respect than my own husband had shown. I gathered all the files, the recorder, the printed emails, and the extracted phone logs Jonas had pulled. I placed them neatly into a folder. The weight of it felt like a lifetime pressed into paper. Before sending the files, I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Jonas watched me, waiting without urgency. I realized I needed to say something aloud before taking the next step. Something I had been holding inside ever since the night Elias looked at me through the cracked doorway at the school, smiling as if nothing dark lived beneath his skin. I said that I had always assumed forgiveness was the automatic path, the expected path, the noble path. But the longer I looked at the truth, the more I understood that forgiveness is not a duty. It is not a requirement of being good or loving. It is a choice. And sometimes it is a choice we are not meant to make. Jonas nodded slowly, as if I had spoken something he had waited to hear. I repeated the thought more clearly. Forgiveness is not an obligation. Sometimes, forgiveness is the one thing we should not offer. The room felt still after that. Not heavy, just honest. I pressed send. The files were delivered to the attorney with a simple note stating that I needed guidance on a matter of urgency and discretion. Jonas assured me it was the right decision. The attorney had a reputation for integrity, and he had parted ways with Elias years ago after refusing to represent him in a case that tested ethical boundaries. If anyone could examine the truth without bias, it was him. Afterward, Jonas and I sat quietly, not in sorrow, not in fear, but in a kind of solemn clarity. I looked again at Liam's photo resting near the lamp. His smile was still warm, still bright, untouched by the darkness that had been unfolding behind him. For the first time since his death, I felt something shift inside me, a sense that the truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was in the open now. It had shape, weight, and direction, and for the first time, I felt ready to follow where it led. The next 48 hours unfolded with a strange, steady quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the silence that comes just before a truth finally reaches the people who can no longer ignore it. I woke early on the second morning to a message from the attorney. He confirmed he had reviewed the files and had moved the information into the hands of the company's executive board, citing ethical obligations. He promised confidentiality. He also said he was sorry for my loss and for everything I had been forced to discover alone. By mid-afternoon, the board summoned Elias. I was not there to witness it, but the attorney described it later. Elias arrived confident, wearing the same controlled smile he used to charm through difficult conversations. But the board did not greet him with warmth. They asked him to sit. They showed him the documents, the emails, the financial transfers in Liam's name. They asked about his meetings with Rowan Hale and the discrepancies in protocol. Elias tried to explain, but every answer contradicted a timestamp, a policy, or a recorded message. Then Rowan Hale was brought in. According to the attorney, Rowan caved almost immediately. Fear made him unravel. He claimed he was manipulated. He said Elias pressured him. He insisted he had no part in anything involving Liam's health, and that Elias had always framed their interactions as necessary for family matters. His denial cut the last thread connecting them. In a single morning, the balance of power shifted. Rowan protected himself. Elias stood alone. By early evening, my phone rang. I recognized the number before I answered. Elias's voice was nothing like the honeyed tone he had used days earlier. It was jagged, frantic, laced with a strain he could no longer disguise. He asked what I had done. He asked who I had talked to. He insisted everything had been misunderstood, that people were making assumptions, that I was letting grief distort my judgment. He spoke quickly, tripping over his words, reaching for calm but failing to hold it. It was the first time I had ever heard him sound uncertain. For a moment, I could hear the man I once believed in, someone who had promised me gentleness and partnership. But promises mean little when truth stands beside you. I let him speak until his voice cracked from strain. Then I answered with the calm that had settled inside me like a stone at the bottom of a river. I told him I had listened to him for many years, and now I was letting the truth speak instead. The silence that followed was sharp. He tried to interrupt, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. He said we needed to talk in person. I told him no, not out of spite, but out of clarity. There was nothing left that required my voice. His choices had already spoken louder than anything I could say. I ended the call. He did not call back. Later that night, the attorney informed me that Elias would be placed under an internal investigation. He explained that the company had a legal obligation to turn certain information over to external authorities. He assured me I would not be forced into a public confrontation unless I chose it. He also said something else, something that surprised me with its blunt compassion. People who manipulate systems often create their own undoing. Elias had left too many openings, too many inconsistencies. The weight of his own decisions would carry him where he was meant to go. There was no scene, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only an unraveling that occurred quietly, the way fabric loosens when a single thread is pulled long enough. Elias's fall did not require my anger. It required only truth. The next morning, I met with a family lawyer and signed separation papers, not out of revenge, not to punish him, but to protect myself, to draw a boundary where one had never existed. The pen felt steady in my hand. My signature looked like it belonged to someone who had finally stepped into the space she had been denied for years. When I returned home, the house felt different, not lighter, not yet, but open, like a door had finally been released from a lock. I walked into Liam's room. The morning light spilled across his blanket, his books, his little fox-patterned quilt. I picked up his beige scarf from the chair. It still held a faint warmth from my hands days earlier. I opened the wooden keepsake box I had once bought for him when he turned 8. He used to store rocks, ticket stubs, and little treasures inside it. Today, it held something else. A small space reserved for closure. I folded the scarf gently and placed it inside. My voice came out soft, steady. "You did well, my sweet boy." And for the first time, the words did not break me. They anchored me. The morning air was cool and bright when Jonas and I stepped out of his truck, the sun just lifting above the roofs of the community center. It painted a warm gold across the bricks, softening the edges of a building that had held so many stories of resilience. Today, it would hold one more, one that belonged not only to me, but to Liam. Across the front entrance hung a small banner, the Selena Hart Fund for Children in Need. The letters were simple, hand-painted by volunteers, but they shimmered in the light as if touched by something gentler than the sun. Jonas walked beside me, carrying the sealed envelope containing the first donation. My hands were empty on purpose. I wanted to feel the moment fully, without gripping anything that could distract me from the quiet shift inside my chest. For so long, pain had wrapped itself around my life like a shadow I could not outrun. But today, pain was only one part of the story, not the whole of it. A group of staff members greeted us with warm smiles. They thanked me for choosing their center, for helping children who felt invisible, forgotten, or unheard. Their gratitude was sincere, and it softened something inside me. I realized I was standing in a place built from the very values I had always believed in: gentleness, empathy, and a chance for better beginnings. Inside, they led us to a small room filled with drawings taped to the walls. The children had created them after hearing they would have new support for educational supplies and mental health programs. Crayon sunrises, stick figure families, bright-colored hope. I stood there for a long moment, letting the images wash over me. Jonas placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. The gesture was not grand or dramatic. It was steady. It was grounding. It reminded me that healing rarely arrives in large, triumphant steps. Most often, it comes in small breaths, small choices, small moments when we allow ourselves to be seen again. One of the staff members asked if I wanted to say a few words. I hesitated. I was not used to speaking publicly about grief, and I had no desire to shape my pain into something theatrical. But this moment was not about theatrics. It was about offering truth. Not the sharp truth that wounds, but the soft truth that holds. So I nodded. I stepped forward, facing a modest circle of people: volunteers, staff, Jonas, and in a way, Liam too. Through the reflections of the small, bright drawings behind me, I spoke slowly, letting each word rise from a place that had finally begun to heal. I told them I once believed that standing up again required strength I did not have. I believed rising meant looking brave, sounding confident, appearing whole. But the more I walked through grief, the more I understood something gentler, something far more true. Standing up does not mean being strong. It simply means not collapsing forever. The room grew still. I felt no pressure to say more than what felt honest. After the small gathering ended, Jonas and I stepped back outside. The sun had climbed higher, warming the pavement. He asked how I felt. I told him the truth: lighter, not because the grief had disappeared, but because it finally had a place to rest. We walked back to the truck without speaking further. Words were not needed. The quiet between us was no longer a void, it was a bridge. When Jonas dropped me off at my new apartment, a small, peaceful space across town, I stood for a moment at the doorway, studying the simplicity of my new beginning. The old house belonged to another chapter, one I had closed not with anger, but with acceptance. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of fresh paint and morning sunlight. I placed my keys on the counter and walked to the small hook near the window. Hanging from it was Liam's beige scarf, the fabric catching the light in soft folds. It looked almost like a gentle wave frozen in time. I traced the woven threads with my fingertips, feeling the warmth of memory rather than the sting of loss. For years I had lived in fear of forgetting him, but I understand now that love does not fade when life changes shape. Love adapts. Love remains. I sat at the kitchen table, letting the sunlight spill across my hands. The quiet felt comforting, no longer sharp. This was not the life I had imagined, but it was mine, fully mine. I whispered the words that rose naturally, without effort. The road ahead belongs to me. The sentence did not tremble. It stood steady, like a truth finally claiming its place. As I prepared tea, letting the gentle steam rise, I realized my story was not ending here. It was opening, like a small door nudged by the morning breeze, revealing something calmer, wider, kinder than what had come before. And in that warmth, I knew the final words I wanted to share, with the people who might hear my story, with anyone who had ever carried silent grief or quiet strength. If you have ever walked through a pain that changed you forever, do you think I made the right choice? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And thank you, truly, for listening to a part of my life story. Here is to all of us who rise, even when we rise quietly.